That was an excellent speech. I mean, we're talking about democracy being based on a 700-person telephone survey. Now, so if that's what democracy is to this government, things have come to a really sad point, in which between 50 and 60% of people thought they might like to change the name back to Howick again. It's obviously appealing to people who are already in the government's camp, but it's certainly, Miss Pansy Wong, it's certainly not what you would call democracy. I want to speak, Mr. Chair, on a couple of issues. I want to speak, Mr. Chair, on a couple of issues and relate to the CCOs and the threat to real democracy. Not the telephone type of democracy, not the 50 or 60% with 8 or 9 points of error kind of democracy, but a real democracy, which is the democracy about what happens when assets of Auckland are put into CCOs. A few months ago, the New Zealand Herald talked about the real challenge of the Auckland legislation being to serve, in a sense, two divergent aims. One, on the one hand, to give Auckland unity, on the other, to make sure that decision-making is close to the people. And I put it to you, Mr. Chair, that this bill is not, although it has improved, and I have to say I will acknowledge that with the improvements we have made to this bill in the last few weeks, and the most recent one, the SOP of George Hawkins that was accepted, it would not go as far as any of us concerned. It's tweaking around the edges, but it's certainly better than where we stood when we were debating this 1 year ago. CCOs. The opinion of 4 government agencies on the CCOs was don't set them up in the way that you want to do it. Ministry of Environment, Treasury, Department of Internal Affairs and the Ministry of Economic Development. Don't do it this way. And the reason is that they believe that it was less democratic, and it made the possibility of the assets of Auckland being put into CCOs and therefore being flogged off and privatised. That, Mr. Chair, is what we talk about when we talk about democracy. That was what overwhelmingly people who came and gave evidence through the Select Committee talked about. Overwhelmingly, they worried about the assets of Auckland being able to be sold off. The overwhelming number of Aucklanders don't want that to happen. This bill, Mr. Chair, Section 77, removes, for example, the precautions on the ports of Auckland being taken out and sold off. Now, it preserves it for a period of time, but it certainly does that. The other point is looking at the issue of water. 35 years, extending the length of time that a private company can take over water assets to 35 years. 35 years, Mr. Chair, means that half of a lifetime this can be locked up in one company. It does not enable a fair or a degree of confidence by Aucklanders living in Auckland to be able to know that this water is still theirs. It's still being used in their interests rather than the interests of a company. And after 35 years, Mr. Chair, after 35 years of this being locked up, it's impossible to understand how a tendering process after 35 years would not then return for another 35 years this water back to that same company. So, Mr. Chair, the privatisation debate, of which many of my colleagues will talk about in the minutes to come, is at the heart of the fears of Aucklanders today. It is the fears that democracy is being undermined.
Honourable Rodney